A book that has met its moment. The book is called To Stop a Tyrant. And believe it or not, before you think anything or say anything, it is a nonpartisan take on this moment in political history and those things that go into birthing tyranny. But we'll get into it in a big way with the author who joins us now, Ira Chaleff. Hello. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
Great to have you in the mix. Wow. I mean, as I say, your book couldn't come at a more opportune moment. The Power of Political Followers to Make or Break a Toxic Leader is the subtitle to Stop a Tyrant. And you break down tyranny in a way that suggests, and a tyrannical leader, in a way that suggests that there are support structures that have to exist for that tyrannical leader to take over.
Yes, exactly. Interestingly enough, Mark, I'm a little bit of a renegade. Most of the scholarly work over the last decades have been about leaders, and my fascination has been with followers. I come from a family in which my maternal grandmother lost her whole family in the Holocaust in World War II, and as a young child, I became fascinated in a very emotional way. Why did people follow when they shouldn't? And in one way or another, ever since then, I've been seeking answers for that. And I hope this book makes a contribution to answering that question. Certainly not an ultimate answer, but hopefully puts a few more pieces of the puzzle in place.
Well, what an interesting way to approach it, because we do seem to focus on the personality associated with the tyrannical leader. Let's say a Stalin, a Hitler, those who famously have risen and been so destructive both to their own people and to countries around the world. Yet you suggest that there is an enabling of them, and that is done by their followers?
Yeah, that's very well put. Exactly. There's at least conforming. In other words, saying, okay, I don't really agree with this person, but what am I going to do? I don't really have much power. I'll go along with it. Or colluding, saying, yeah, well, I think this guy is going to help us clean up the mess that I perceive in the world. And yeah, I know they got some worrisome behaviors, but I'm going to put my weight against them as well. So those are two kinds of followers, the conformist or the colluding. My work has been around a third type of follower, which is I call the courageous follower. And the courageous follower both supports their leader when their leader is doing something that really deserves support. And leadership is hard. We can't expect perfection from our leaders. But if they're generally doing the right thing, let's give them our support. Let's throw cynicism out the window. But if they're not, that's when we have to speak up, even if there's risk to us, whether that's social risk, economic risk, or worse. We need to speak up because that's how we contain the worst aspects of that leader who may potentially become a tyrant.
Isn't that interesting? So that becomes the intriguing way in which you lay out slowly the way that followers allow for the tyrant to emerge and indeed to succeed.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It sometimes they can just parachute in all fangs, but more often than not, they somehow or other work their way to power, and they won't necessarily become a tyrant, but we know that power tends to distort. Power tends to corrupt. That's an age-old observation. So what we need to be careful of is that, first of all, we support leaders who don't seem to have as much tendency to allow power to do that to them. But secondly, all of us, if we have enough power, might misuse it. So we have to have structures around us and actually personalities around us who can help us say, hey, you're going a bridge too far. I like what you're doing up to here. Now you're overstepping the line, and you got to pull back, or else I'm not sure I can keep following you.
Yeah, that's what you really talk about in your book, the idea that there's an inner circle of close confidants that can uh, help, support, um, and may be able to actually influence policy is kind of what you're suggesting. But then there are sort of there's another circle. You break it down quite clearly. There's an inner circle, there's a near inner circle, there's a bureaucratic circle, and so on. I wonder if you could get into a little bit of that because it's fascinating. You don't need to have all those circles working together for the tyrant to arise, do you?
No, you don't. Um, there's not an exact mathematical equation here, but there's a confluence of events and energies. So all politics is about leading and following, but also it's always within a context. What is going on at the moment? Are people feeling relatively safe and secure? Are they feeling threatened financially or potential of invasion or whatever it is? So people behave in different ways based on their sense of what the context is. Now, each of us has a different capacity to reach the leaders. And, we could be talking about our mayor, our governor. It doesn't just have to be the head of state or the head of government. But those of us who go to rallies, we have a certain amount of power by reason of our numbers and how we voice our approval or not. Those of us who are in the inner circle obviously can whisper in the in the leader's ear um, before they go to bed, even. So we each have different communication channels, different powers of persuasion. What my task is in this book is to help each of us identify what are our powers and how can we best use them in a timely enough way so that if we have a leader who's starting to abuse power, we can interrupt that projection, that trajectory towards becoming a tyrant before they've consolidated so much power that really it's a suicidal effort to stop it at that point. It's a bit like a fire. If you can stop a fire while it's small, that's easy. By the time it gets out of control, all you can do is run for your life. We want to try to catch this kind of trajectory before we have to run for our lives.
I'll get to the U.S. in a second, but let's just talk about the world at large. It's really a time where we've seen the rise of tyrannical leadership around the globe. You've seen even a different kind of tyranny. And on this, I might point to Hungary, let's say. It's a kind of soft tyranny, if you will, where the universities and many of the higher education institutions have been culled of various professors who don't represent the mainstream, as they put it, or maybe represent a religious doctrine that they don't approve of. That's only the beginning. You've seen rights of Hungarians taken away in a series of moves over these years, and you look at Orban, and he is someone who is pretty much securing his future. Again, you can call it tyrant, you can call it you can just call him a leader. There's a tyrant. Tyrants can take on different forms, I guess is what I'm getting at, and that seems to be more of a soft tyranny, that which is going on in Hungary, for example.
I think you are expressing a view that I often hear. I think we have to be cautious about that view because soft tyrannies have a habit of becoming hard tyrannies. Um, you know, if you go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., the first part is 10 years before the Holocaust begins. All of the creeping legislation that started to constrain people of a Jewish consent or people who were um, Roma or sexually different, that law started to be slowly implemented and passed, and then it became a cascade, an avalanche. So this is the whole point. that when we see that soft, quote unquote, tyranny beginning to manifest, let's not get too complacent about, well, it's just a soft tyranny. That's really the time when we need to act.
That's a fair point. I guess I was pointing to these emerging tyrannical leaders as taking different forms, and I think you so appropriately point to the fact that, well, they can take that form initially, but they can get it can get a lot toward a grim place quite quickly.
Mm.
And when they're, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, did you say something?
No,
Sorry.
no,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I love your language as well. A grim place is very evocative, and also a correct characterization. This is kind of the theme of my book, that you can't really stop a tyrant, even though the title is To Stop a Tyrant. What you can do is stop someone who's becoming a tyrant. In the book, I call them a proto tyrant. They have the characteristics of a tyrant, which, if allowed to fully emerge, could well become a tyrant. So, this is a little tricky. This isn't easy stuff, because you can have all leaders, all political leaders, have to acquire a certain amount of power in order to implement their agenda. So, it's not just the act of acquiring power, it's the act of acquiring more power than is necessary within a democratic political system to get something done. And um, we have to be careful, because there are philosophies out there that say, democratic system is pretty inefficient, and guess what? It is pretty inefficient. And an autocratic system can seem very attractive under certain circumstances, but there's a great risk and a great price to pay. So in a mature democracy, we have to understand that there's going to be a certain amount of sloppiness in trying to deal with our problems. um, don't dismiss them, don't give them a free pass because of that, but also don't um, give up on the democratic process. Instead, learn how to use it better, and learn how to get our leaders to use it better. That's our role as democratic followers. And not democratic could be, with a small d, Republican,
Small d, I
Democrat.
know, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just the process itself, and it's such an interesting thing to hear you mention something which I was going to touch on, and that is the notion that there can be a kind of chaos, societal chaos. Maybe it has to do with protests that take over cities. Maybe there are. You can sell the notion that there are so many people coming in from south of the border. It's a completely chaotic situation. What do we do? This is just to reference our country, and that there are law and order issues in America's cities. There's smash and grab robberies. Everybody's in greater danger than ever before. This is a notion that's sold regardless of what the actual statistics are. And the idea is, guys, wouldn't you rather have me in charge? I mean, this is the implied notion. And now you have law and order, and you have respect for justice, and I'm going to shut all this stuff down, and the trains are going to run on time, and life's going to be good again instead of the chaos. It seems as though that's frequently the primordial ooze from which tyranny rises, you know?
Yeah, well said, Mark. So I make this observation in the book, that it's important to step back every once in a while and look around. You can go to New York City and you can hear, oh my God, there's these smash and grab robberies, or there's been a crime on the subway. At the same time, the reality is that literally millions of people are coming to work every day, getting their job done, going home safely, getting their groceries, the trash is being removed, the kids are going to school. Yes, the schools could be better, but life is generally working. Now, unfortunately, we know, and I'm not dissing the media. The media is absolutely necessary to a democratic system, and yet there are certain incentives of the media to play up, and there always have been, the things that scare us, alarm us, and make us pay attention, with our eyeballs, or buy our subscriptions to the paper, etc. So we have to step back again as mature adults and recognize um, the information we're being given. Where is it coming from? Who is it serving? How do we evaluate it? How do we put it into context so that we can make as much as possible good rational decisions from both sides of the political aisle, rather than scaring us into then saying, "Oh my God, we need a savior right now," and that takes us down the dark path to a potential tyrant.
Yeah, and it's funny. You have dealt with Republicans and Democrats, and within a wide range of government agencies, you've operated with both sides of the aisle, which is why this piece that you've done to stop a tyrant, the power of political followers, finds an audience with both sides of the aisle, because you're not, a party-specific guy. But it is interesting that in this new political season, there are documents of the sort that, for example, Project 2025 it lays out, the documents that sort of lay out a system by which government would be transformed. And in the transformation, the process by which there might be some checks and balances built into even those who have government jobs at a lower level would be protected from just being replaced by party loyalists. I mean, thousands of party loyalists or loyalists to a leader. So again, I don't mean to try to pin you down in some kind of partisan way, but I do wonder about when documents or strategies of that sort come to our attention, how you process that in the body politic. We scream about it. Those of us who, I can just say that I am partisan. I'm scared by that kind of thing, and so I talk about it a lot on this show. But sometimes it doesn't punch through, and I wonder how it's processed. This sort of thing, when you become aware of a growing strategy to take power any way they can get it, how does that get processed, or how should it be processed?
Well, I think you do need to take it seriously. Um, when someone is saying this is what they're going to do, you need to take it seriously. Now, having said that, um, and again, I could be accused of, sort of trying to equalize both sides of this. But there is a way to step back, because just as folks on the left are really worried about if the right gets more power, that it's going to dismantle our checks and balances. The folks on the right, and I don't mean everyone on the right because that's too broad a category, um, that that are very concerned about what they call the deep state. Now, I don't like the term the deep state, but at the same time, we need to understand, and this is political theory, which has been known for 100 years at least, that bureaucracies do tend to then form their own sort of they become their own um, masters, and it's sometimes in a democratic system, it takes a charismatic leader to again pull them back a bit, because theoretically, our system is that whoever we elect um, is supposed to then implement the policies that we elected them on. And yes, they have to get Congress to go along, but they also need a bureaucracy to help implement those. Now, if the bureaucracy is saying, well, no, we're not doing that because this guy's only going to be around for 4 years and we've been here for 20 years. That is another form of problem. So again, democracy is not easy. There are no perfect forms of it. So my whole point is, rather than let us be really scared or terrorized by these prospects, step back and evaluate. Okay, to the degree, if I'm on the end of the political spectrum that's worried about dismantling checks and balances, okay, how do I at least slow that down? What are the levers for doing that? And this is where one has to become politically savvy and politically engaged, rather than just, fret and wring our hands.
That's where, when I look at the circles of support, inner circle, near inner circle, bureaucratic circle, the activist circle, the populist, these are all things that you discuss in your book. And these are all things that help support the rise of a tyrant and essentially the sustaining of a tyrant. When you talk about political activism, as this is just beginning, as you know, you can see the train coming, the tyranny train coming down the tracks. Where do you insert yourself? Not you, I'm talking about. Where does one, with their political activism,
Sure.
insert themselves? With the populace, with the activist circle? I mean, and just to use your terms, which I think really beautifully break everything down, in what groups are you likely to make a difference or be able to, hold things up?
In my book, Mark, I try to show how you can make a difference from any of the circles that you find yourself in or are willing to put yourself in. So, for example, theoretically, the least powerful circle for the individual is the populist circle, where you are perhaps online following what's happening, or you go to a rally and follow what's happening, but you don't have any particular inside data or any levers that you can particularly pull. Okay, let me give you the most fundamental example. Um, and actually, there's a classic photograph from Nazi Germany where everybody is saluting Adolf Hitler, and there's one guy who's not saluting. He's not saluting. He's taking a stand. Now, does that make a difference? You can say, well, probably not. But on the other hand, if it becomes kind of part of the culture to say, look, I don't salute everybody who says everything. I salute people who say things that are really helpful. And they might say 5 things that are helpful, and I'm going to cheer and roar, in approval. And then they say 3 things that I think are very detrimental to our country. And I'm not going to do that. I don't care who on the right of me or the left of me standing next to me is doing that. I'm going to take my stand. And maybe, you know what, just maybe by me taking a stand, maybe that gives them the courage to take a stand as well. Now, you can go beyond that, of course, and say, I'm going to get more involved. I'm going to go into the activist circle. And then you have to look at the various mechanisms that are available to you. And, frankly, I have seen on both sides of the political aisle people who had no power of their own really take a strong look at how does our grassroots system work and figured out how to acquire an inordinate amount of power in their political parties by stepping into these roles which were more or less moribund or vacant and shaping them in their image. We may not like the way they did it, but they did it within the um, confines of the democratic process. So we can't blame them for doing that. Instead, we have to look at ourselves and say, okay, well, now how do I do what I can do to make as much difference as they seem to be making?
You mentioned that Hitlerian time where you're seeing all of these rallies and that black and white footage, with the guys walking in lockstep, and then Hitler himself screaming, and because we don't speak German, most of us, it just sounds like the ranting, and how could anybody go for this guy? I saw within the last year 2 things. Same speech, kind of that I've just described, with subtitles, and then same speech where they dub Hitler with English. And it is scary because the verbiage used, the speech given, mirrors the speeches that you hear today about immigrants and about their destroying our country, and it's absolutely scary. I mean, it's so wild that for decades I just thought, God, could anybody go for that? That screaming madman. And then when you actually see it transformed, it's like, oh my God, because that screaming madman is just like our screaming madmen today. And people go for that. They like strong leadership as well. That's part of the rise of a tyrant, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
Ira, people are drawn to the charisma.
Yes. So there is sort of a classic formulas for how proto tyrants become tyrants and win people over. One of them, this is a little bit of a jargony term, but it's othering, saying we're the real Germans. We're the real Americans. We're the real Spanish, whoever, whatever it is. And these guys are not. They're the other. And they're destroying our way of life. Well, the chances are they're not destroying our way of life. The chances are they just want to live and make a life for their family, just like we want to make a life for our family. So we have to get sophisticated enough as democratic citizens to go, no, 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 you're not going to manipulate me that way. Yes, yes, we need more orderly controls at the border or whatever it is. And I don't mean to be casual about it. These are serious questions, but don't let it panic us into saying, oh my God, there goes my whole family and my kids' future and my wife's safety and whatever. And if I let this other dominate, because that's just us being manipulated. And that's where, as followers, political followers, we have to become more sophisticated. And I hope that in my book that I'm helping people to step back and kind of re-examine how do they do the role of political follower, and how would they like to do it differently, and how could they do it differently?
Yeah, it's a tall order. When you see it coming, it's just a very interesting test for, how active you're going to get and what options one might have. And the last thing I would say is, just because I sort of feel like we're living that part of it too, is when people feel as though they have less of a stake in what's going on, that their agency at the table in terms of affecting policy and the future of America, their country, when that has been limited or reduced, or they may feel completely like outsiders, like, deep state, it's all being controlled by the fill in the blanks, the intellectual elites, whatever it might be, you begin to see how that can breed resentment, anger, and then an activism that actually promotes a tyranny, right?
Yes. I spent quite a few years in Washington, D.C., with a nonpartisan organization that helped members of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, to serve their constituents better by reason of better communication practices, better management practices, better planning practices. One of the things I observed is this really interesting phenomenon that we have this misnamed congressional recesses. And what happens during a congressional recess is, the 535 voting members, House and Senate, go back to their districts and states. And they'll have 6, 8 more events a day, talking to people, meeting with people, and they hear what people are worried about. They hear what people want to see being elevated in terms of the policy agenda. And then they come back to Washington when the quote unquote recess is over, and they start talking to each other. Did you get an earful on that? Oh boy, did I get an earful on that? What are we going to do about that? This is actually a reasonably healthy process that, again, we have to not give up on it and feel powerless, but instead go, well, if I want them to hear me, show up when they're in the district, show up, ask to meet with them in their office, ask to meet with their staff, um, go to the town hall, ask the questions, because yes, you're only one in hundreds of thousands, but guess what? you're if you're concerned about something, the chances are that thousands of other people are. And if enough of us speak up, these are elected officials. They listen. They know that, yes, despite the gerrymandering, despite all the incumbent advantages, they could lose their seat if they don't pay attention, if enough people are speaking up.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of evidence that you know that political movements are born of sometimes very small numbers. And by the way, tyrannical political movements are born sometimes of just a small group. So it works both ways, doesn't it? Ira
You're
Chaleff,
absolutely right.
the book is To Stop a Tyrant, The Power of Political Followers. I'm so impressed by your career, your decades in Washington in a nonpartisan way. And this book really lays it out, as I say, a book that's met its time,
Mm.
Ira. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. My pleasure.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.